welcome to the stage Executive Director of the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA, Natalia Kanem.
Friends, partners, women who deliver, especially the Women Deliver group. Thank you, Katja Iverson, for delivering us this conference. We're so proud to be here, and we congratulate the entire team. I'd like to hail up the young leaders and the barrier breakers. Good morning to everyone in all our sexual and gender rights and diversities. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you among so many friends, and new allies. And what's bringing us together is an unwavering commitment. We are committed to breaking down the barriers so that women and girls will realize their full potential and power. I want to begin by congratulating Canada, our hosts. Yesterday, the announcement by the Prime Minister of major, unprecedented funding for sexual and reproductive health and rights. This is what's going to help speed changes in gender power dynamics that lead to progress. So women deliver. So we accelerate progress for women and girls in a big way, and that's what I would call making a statement. Power, progress, change. It is time to redefine power and to recognize our ability as individuals, but especially as groups. P-O-W-E-R, that's the we in the P-O-W-E-R of power. And at every level, we each have a role to play. It's essential for the health and well-being of women and girls. It's essential to drive social change now and into the future for a more inclusive, sustainable, prosperous, and peaceful world. That is the world we want. And together we're already advancing the health and rights of women and girls everywhere. It's at the heart of the work of UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, and in over 150 countries around the world. We know, and we've heard from women and girls and families, that reproductive health and rights are the foundation for a life of choice, a life of empowerment, thank you, and equality for women and girls. This is why having sexual and reproductive health and rights as a cornerstone of the Sustainable Development Goals that the entire international community pledged to achieve by the year 2030 is so crucial in this year, 2019. I've been in Kenya preparing the road for the Nairobi Summit in November, and there I was reminded of a local proverb. When sleeping women awaken, mountains move. And around the world, we're hearing a chorus of women's voices rising, saying time's up, saying me too, saying she decides. And we hear the echoes of previous generations, our bodies, ourselves, our rights. So as we celebrate this year that landmarked Cairo International Conference on Population and Development, in 1994, that Cairo ICPD hosted delegates from every region, every culture, every part of the world. And what the world recognized was that empowering women and enabling the exercise of rights freely about when, whether, if to have children is central to sustainable development. And there was government, there were activists, civil society organizations, of course UNFPA, from the podium with Nafis Sadiq. We all pledged to tear down barriers that stand between women and girls and their rights and choices. And this should not be up for debate 25 years later. So we rejoice over the remarkable gains that we have made, and there are remarkable gains. fewer women dying in pregnancy and childbirth, more women having access to modern contraception, more girls staying in school. We are beginning to turn the tide against certain harmful practices, notably child marriage and female genital mutilation, and all of this is good. I've seen it myself as UNFPA representative in Tanzania. Hundreds and hundreds of rural schoolgirls marching in their brown checkered uniforms, declaring for themselves an end to female genital mutilation in their rural communities. Impressive, courageous. And now last week, South Africa joins the ranks of a growing number of countries, including Ethiopia, Rwanda, and our Canadian hosts, to name gender-equal cabinets, 50-50. The face of power is beginning to change, and we've seen positive legislation in a number of other countries, the repeal of so-called marry your rapist laws. What was the world thinking of? Legislation against domestic violence, child marriage, FGM. The mountains are moving, but slowly, certainly not fast enough for what we need, because the world that we envisioned in Cairo in 1994 is still a bit distant from reality. On this planet Earth, this fragile planet, which is now occupied by over 7.5 billion souls, hundreds of millions of women and girls are still waiting. They're waiting for all that Cairo promised. There are more than 800 women who die every day giving birth or during pregnancy. She's waiting. The more than 200 million women who want to prevent pregnancy and lack access to modern contraception, she's waiting. The 1 woman in 3 who during her lifetime will be subjected to physical or sexual violence. Full respect and full equality. This is what the fight is for. And yes, there are 200 million women and girls who already have been subjected to female genital mutilation, and 33,000 girls are going to get married today if we do not act to stem that tide. The data that UNFPA reviewed from 45 countries recently shows that only half of married women can safely negotiate decisions about sexual relations, about contraception, about their reproductive health care. They have to ask permission. Me Too and other social movements are showing us just how pervasive sexual harassment, sexist attitudes, violence against women and those perceived as other are still in countries and in all sectors. So changing stubborn gender norms and the social, cultural, and legal barriers that prevent women from having the same opportunities and power as men requires steady work, but it doesn't have to be slow. Community after community showing that it's possible, that it can happen. For us at UNFPA, this means engaging with governments, engaging with schools and communities and religion and employers, especially civil society, and absolutely media, involving everyone in the transformation, creating an enabling environment, proving to men and to boys that gender equality is good for all, and that we all must be supportive and nonviolent and caring. When everyone awakens, the mountains will move even faster. And gender equity is not just a women's issue. Everyone benefits. Where violence and harmful practices exist, this is antithetical to what our movement stands for. And the good news is that there's some global momentum here with political and financial commitment to end the epidemic of violence, including rape in conflict. And this was very evident during the recent conference in Oslo, Norway, on ending sexual and gender-based violence in humanitarian crises, which UNFPA proudly co-sponsored along with others. There is progress, but I think even because of that progress, we see that sexual and reproductive rights are increasingly now being challenged and being re-questioned. Look, we may not be able to direct the winds, but we certainly can adjust the sails to inspire the urgent action that's needed. The governments of Kenya and Denmark, with UNFPA, have come together. We will convene the Nairobi Summit on ICPD 25 in November. As Cairo was a watershed moment 25 years ago for sexual and reproductive health and rights, Nairobi is a milestone moment on that collective journey as we aim to not meet, but to produce concrete political and financial commitments, to build on the strong partnerships such as we have here at Women Deliver 2019, and to bring that promise for full sexual and reproductive rights and health to everyone, everywhere. Nairobi will be an opportunity for us to create that pathway, to co-create the achievements of 3 zeros that UNFPA has declared for 2030: 0 unmet need for family planning, 0 preventable maternal deaths, and 0 gender-based violence and harmful practices. And I've alluded to child marriage and female genital mutilation. Everything we do has to be based on high-quality data and evidence to zero in on where the needs are greatest and to ensure that indeed no one is left behind. This timing is deliberate because there can be no sustainable in the Sustainable Development Goals without that ICPD platform with a program of action that says women belong at the center of development and population is not about numbers, it's about people, it's about human lives. So with empowerment and education, especially comprehensive sexuality education to bring young people out of imposed ignorance because we deny facts and truth to young people, particularly adolescent girls. This has consequences, and they can be life-threatening and life-altering consequences. Adolescent girls deserve to be able to make informed decisions about their own sexual health and lives. And we know that when it comes to sexual and reproductive health and rights, people with disabilities, Indigenous people, racial and ethnic minorities, persons of diverse sexual orientation, why must they face persistent inequalities and stigma? This is why rights and choices has to be part of our mantra on the road to Nairobi and beyond into 2030. Universality is a guiding principle of ICPD because everyone has a right to sexual and reproductive health, and we're not going to achieve the universal in universal health coverage either if we don't ensure that health systems all across the world are equipped, well equipped, to deliver quality sexual and reproductive health services for everyone, regardless of who they are. And that's why the work of UNFPA on data is also mission critical. In order to know who is being left behind, we have to be able to identify them, to tell their story, and to reach them appropriately. And the person who understands the needs best is the person that is finding solutions to that problem because they have the issue and they own it. Therefore, in Nairobi, the springboard to solutions is to accelerate the progress. And why not achieve this even before 2030? Our mission here also has been to knit the fabric of our movement across silos. I believe we're starting to do that better. How to make it happen more is by bringing in new voices, bringing in new partnerships. And above all, we declare our need for the robust financing, the financing that we will need to deliver bolder, more integrated, and more innovative solutions. Because the health sector, underfunded as it is not going to bring this on its own. We need to bring the health sector together with the education, gender, population, development sectors, finance, the treasury, private sector. Everyone has to be part of the solution. And I would say that when sleeping women awaken, mountains do move. And when we, in our numbers, wake up the ones who hold the purse strings, that's when the mountains are really going to start to move, because we need resources. The clock is ticking towards 2030. We need far more resources to deliver for all, with an urgency that's commensurate with the task at hand. And in Nairobi, we will want to see concrete commitments, global, national, local, including especially financial ones, from governments, from international financial institutions, from the private sector, and more. Already, youth networks, civil society, private sector partners, and academics have been mobilizing. We need more of you to come together with us so we arrive in Nairobi with concrete pledges in hand. Please join us and let us take the energy from here, the ideas and the passion of Women Deliver Vancouver 2019, and turn it into ambitious, action-focused, adequately financed commitments from Cairo to Nairobi and into the world for 2030. Let's move mountains together. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Welcome to the stage our moderator and panel.
Hello and welcome. At the beginning, I'd like to thank Natalia and UNFPA for the great work they're doing to empower women. My name is Shahira Amin. I'm an independent journalist, and I've traveled a long, long way to be with you here today, all the way from Cairo, Egypt. But it's been worth every second and every mile. Girls and women are drivers of development, and they're powerful agents of change. In an ideal gender-equal world, everybody wins. When girls attain equal access to education and women access healthcare, decent work, and representation in political and economic decision-making, this has a ripple effect that benefits us all, the women, their families, their communities, and the entire society. Gender equality is critical to the success of all of the other SDGs, including those related to poverty, prosperity, climate, peace, and justice. When women move closer to gender equality, they move closer to realizing their full potential, which boosts their ability to participate within the formal economy, break the cycle of poverty, and improve the well-being of their families and communities. While progress has been made in bridging the gender gap in many countries, much more remains to be done to break down the legal, structural, and cultural barriers that are holding women back. To end gender-based discrimination, harmful cultural practices need to be wiped out. But we also need legal frameworks that guarantee female equality. We need empowering laws, and we need to do away with restrictive laws that limit the rights of women and girls, preventing them from reaching their potential. It's not just a women's issue, it's a societal issue. Boys and men need to work alongside women to address gender equality. In Egypt, where I come from, female genital mutilation was widespread because men refused to marry a girl who has not been cut. Now, more recently, men are actively engaged in the fight against the harmful practice. Shattering harmful sociocultural norms requires leadership. It requires a coordinated effort that involves men and boys at all ages and all levels. We have a group of expert panelists who will help us identify the challenges, but more importantly, they will give us solutions. They will tell us what is needed to overcome those barriers. And they will also tell us what they each are doing as individuals in the fight to attain gender equality. Please join me in giving them a hand, welcoming them here. And my guests, starting with Nancy Northup, President of the Center for Reproductive Rights. Seated next to her is Hina Jilani, a member of the Elders and Pakistani lawyer. The only male on the panel, Alvaro Bernejo. He's Director General of IPPF, a global NGO working in 40 countries to ensure universal access to sexual and reproductive health care. Then we have Lina Abirafa, Executive Director of the Arab Institute for Women at Lebanon American University in Beirut. And Lina is in her feminist t-shirt, and she'll explain what that word is in Arabic later on. We also have Wanique Horn-Miller, former Olympian and current activist. I should correct that. Last but by no means least, Mosola Kaseketi, Zambian filmmaker and human rights activist. And the beautiful Anuka, and she is a Sri Lankan activist fighting for young women with sustained solutions. The lady in red. All right, without further ado, let's begin the panel with you, Nancy. Nancy, sexual health and reproductive rights are a human right. Yet in many countries around the world, women are not free to make their own choices, to decide whether and when to get married, when to have children, and have no access to quality reproductive health care. Are the laws the problem, or is it the culture, or both, do you think?
Well, the answer is absolutely both. I mean, law is part of culture, just like religion and language and economies are part of culture, but law is part of culture. So it both reflects the culture, but it also can move and change the culture. And if we look at the area in which law is a very huge barrier in terms of women's access to reproductive health care, that's in the area of abortion restrictions. And they are definitely an alive and well illustration of patriarchy in action. I mean, the abortion laws that ban women's access to abortion, and some places in the world still, in every circumstances, even to save her life, are clearly an example of denying women control over their health, their life, their future, their families. And even the type of restrictions that we have in some places, like saying that women need to get counseling and then wait for 1 day or 2 days or 3 days or longer, are a reflection of an idea, a cultural idea about women that we're not fully able to make decisions. We don't really know what we want, and so imposing on that shapes how people think about women as decision makers. So it's both and. However, what we're doing at the Center for Reproductive Rights, and have been doing throughout our history, which is over 25 years, is taking those other commitments that also come from culture, like the commitments that were made at Cairo about women being at the center of decisions about their reproductive health care, about reproductive rights being human rights, and taking those very important concepts and translating them into actual legal guarantees. So what we've been doing around fighting the very strong barriers on abortion is taking both, at the national level, constitutional rights, but also looking at regional human rights guarantees and treaties, international human rights guarantees and treaties, and then going to the bodies that oversee those, everything from the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights to the African Commission on Human Rights, the European Court of Human Rights, and the bodies at the UN that guarantee and hold governments accountable to these, and have been saying, how do these rights about privacy, health, life, non-discrimination, equality, freedom from cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment apply when it comes to decisions women make about their reproductive health care? So in the area of abortion, we've been able to take aim at some of these tough restrictions by illustrating how denying women access to abortion, for example, can be cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment. And we have won cases in the UN Human Rights Committee against, for example, Peru, who denied a woman access to a young woman, a 17-year-old, who found out that she had a fetus that was not compatible with life. And they said, you have to carry to term. And the UN Human Rights Commission said, that is cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, that the government knew it would cause her suffering, and they were therefore responsible for it. And we also brought cases like that against Ireland. So it's taking these important concepts and being able to give them legal power.
We'll hear more about the work of the Center a little later on, but decades after the population conference in Cairo, the word sexual rights remains taboo in some countries. Jilani, Pakistan has one of the highest abortion rates in the world, but it also has a very low contraception rate. This despite the fact that abortion can only take place in very limited or urgent cases. Are the constraints legal or cultural?
As Nancy has said, I think the constraints are, of course, mixed, and it can be cultural, but then, culture is also shaped by several factors, religion, etc. And then culture shapes practices as well as the law. So, I mean, that's a question that we will all be answering all the time. But I think one thing that we are all very clear on is that abortion is one of the most contested issues in many parts of the world. I don't know how statistically we can prove that Pakistan has a high or low abortion rate, because it is such an underground thing that you can never count the figures.
Yes.
But obviously, I mean, from our observation, and the kind of environment in which women live today, and the kind of controversy that this issue is all involved in, yes, it's one of the most challenging issues for Pakistani women activists as well as lawyers. But one thing that I can say, I mean, conference is all about breaking barriers. And the thing is that we have broken many barriers. So there is no reason for me to fear that this is a barrier against which we are going to break our shins. I'm sure that we can break them, and there has been a lot of progress. I'll give you one example. Because when we talk about these barriers, we have to kind of correlate our work on the ground in terms of transformation of the society, but also make sure that when we are able to get certain legal tools in place, those should also benefit us in our social movement for social transformation and change of people's attitudes towards certain issues. In Pakistan in 1992, although we already had a very restrictive abortion law, this whole issue of abortion came within what we call the Islamic penal laws, which has made it even more difficult to attack it. Despite that, there have been some kind of rays of hope somewhere. For instance, one of the cases that I did some years ago, of a young, mentally challenged girl who was victim of rape by her stepfather. She was 14 years old, and she became pregnant. And we went to court. And I think that initially I did see a lot of resistance from the judges on saying anything about her ability, her right to abortion. But there are things that you explain in certain ways, and then you get the judiciary on your side, and that is one way of overcoming legal barriers. This was a case in which my point was that when you say that abortion is possible to save the mother's life, Life doesn't mean preventing death. Life also means her quality of life. How does she, a 14-year-old mentally challenged girl, victim of rape, produce a child and then look after her, the child? And she was given the right, and in fact the government was directed to arrange a board of medical doctors to see to it that she gets the right treatment, which they didn't want to say abortion, but what they meant was that if it is not compatible with her quality of life, then they should give her the service, and that the abortion can be legally performed. So there are these things that are lying there on the ground, which I think can be picked up by lawyers in the future to interpret it in certain ways. But certainly there is a challenge. Obviously there is one. And you say there is a long way to go in changing social attitudes, in changing the resistance from certain groups, in bringing about legislative change, and giving our governments the guts and the courage to confront those groups in order to save women so that they can fully fulfill their responsibility to protect. The responsibility to protect towards women has to be unconditional with their compliance with certain social norms. Right now, most governments feel that protection is only available to women if they conform to certain social and religious practices. If not, then they're outside that ambit of protection by the state.
So a top-down approach or from the grassroots?
I think both sides. Both sides have to be tackled. Law becomes an important tool when you want to get results. But in order for those results to be easily acceptable and that the society then starts supporting the issue, you have to work from below.
Alvaro, in many of the countries where IPPF works, sexuality is still a source of stigma, especially among adolescent girls. How do we overcome this stigma which stands in the way of women and girls accessing their sexual rights?
Thank you. I like to think of this by trying to imagine yourself as an adolescent girl and think, what is it going to take for me to be able to say, I want it, I want to make the decision myself, for it to be in my hands and in my own terms? How does stigma get in the way of that? Well, first you need to be able to have the agency to say I, like I matter and I have a say with what happens with my life. And that is not just about individual empowerment. That is about the role of women in society, the role of girls in society, and what role they play, how they're seen, and how they fit in that. And we can see stigma throughout that, shaping that already, and how I see myself and how I think I fit in society because of the messages I'm getting from the others. We know how to work on those things. Then I need to be able to say, my sexuality matters. I am a sexual being. Adolescents are sexual beings, kids are sexual beings, adults are sexual beings. We are all born with a sexuality. That is okay, and there's no denying that. That also takes a particular empowerment and view of society around it. And then you're going to have to be able to say, and I want that decision to be in my hands, or that contraceptive in my hands, or I want whatever it is in my hands. And there, stigma affects in a different way. It affects in terms of shaping the cultural and legal realities that my colleagues have just been talking about. It affects what am I going to expect from the provider when I go to a doctor and they see I'm an adolescent girl sexually active. How are they going to react? Again, we know how to work on these things. We are working on these things. But they all shape my experience, what I think I'm able to do, what I can expect, the reaction I can expect. And I say this, and I want to highlight, sort of as we're sitting here today in 2019, that of course stigma, patriarchy, and privilege have existed for a long time, right? They're not new. But that doesn't mean we should accept them as a passive thing that's just always been there and will continue to be there. It can be changed, and we need to recognize that today, as we are sitting here, and probably that's why we are sitting here, the opposition that is working on fear, on hate, creating, exacerbating, building on that stigma and discrimination is better organized, it is better financed, and it is more aggressive than it has ever been. And the answer to that has to be, so are we. We are better organized. We are more mobilized than we have ever been. And because of that, we will prevail. So I think it's important that we think of stigma and discrimination in this way. It has been there for a long time. Yes, patriarchy and privilege have been there, but they can be overturned, they can be exacerbated, and right now, there is a lot of macho politics, as I like to call it, that is the politics of fear, of hate, and of aggression. We need to respond to that, being organized, being resilient, and speaking out in a way that maybe many of us, I count myself amongst those who thought when in Spain we fought for this in the 80s coming out of a military dictatorship. I thought this was part of our fight for civil rights. We would win it. That was it. That's how I felt. Now I realize, no. We're going to have to win it again and again and again. Right. And we will win it again and again and again, as long as it takes.
Let's stay with the stigma for one more question for Lina, because there is still stigma around sexuality in the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. You and I live with that every single day. Just before I boarded the plane to come here, there was an announcement from the Grand Sheikh of Al-Azhar, the highest authority in Sunni Islam, saying that it's okay for a husband to beat his wife as long as he doesn't break any bones. Wow. Lina, what can be done?
Well, since you've asked me such an easy question, maybe I'll take this opportunity to talk about the T-shirt first. You prompted me so well, so I'm sorry, I'm going to have to stand up. So this says feminist in Arabic. And the reason that we made these shirts is because everybody seems to have a problem with the F word. But we've seen our young women and men in the region who are activists, who are working on human rights and social justice and believe in equality, but still don't claim this word. We see people who will do anything to distance themselves from it, who run away from it. We see people who think it's a Western import and imposition. But what we at the Arab Institute for Women wanted to show was that feminism belongs to everyone and feminism is everywhere. And so we made these shirts because we want to have these courageous conversations and we like to poke and provoke. So here we are. I hope that... There you go. So now...
The easy part.
Now let's get to the easy part. With stigma, well, the challenge is that from the very earliest ages, we aren't taught to have ownership over our own bodies. We aren't given any kind of comprehensive fact-based sex education. Parents don't play a role in explaining to children what happens, what bodies do. We don't talk about consent, safe and unsafe touching. I'll use a concrete example. I have a niece who is 4. And so we tell her, people should ask you every single time they want to touch you or hug you or kiss you, can we do this? Including me as her aunt. Can I do this? Is it okay? And every single time she has the right to say no, because we've given her the right to use that word. We've taught her that word no. And when you teach young people, young women, especially girls, little girls, the word no, they will use it all the time in the right ways, the right ways. They will use it because they know that their body belongs to them and they have a right to say no. It's a very powerful word. So we don't do any of that. So I think that's one of the first challenges. The other is we just don't know what our rights are. Even young people who are fairly well educated, when I ask, do they think there's equality? Do they know? Do they understand the context? They actually don't. So we can't afford that kind of ignorance. There's a lot of misconception about what is violence. Where are the limits? Where are their rights? What is bodily autonomy and integrity? What is dignity? All of those kinds of things, I think, are denied because we're so encumbered by sociocultural obstacles, by stereotypes, by expectations. And so we see women and girls, generation after generation, restricted, held back, told, no, shame, don't, you can't, you shouldn't, or why did you, and now you see what happened. So with those kinds of messages that we continue to perpetuate, it's very difficult to see changes.
The word no is empowering, anger is empowering, and I've seen the naysayers effect change on the ground. Anuka, as an environmental activist working with sustained solutions, one of your goals has been to create a more enabling environment for women entrepreneurs, young women entrepreneurs in underprivileged communities. What are some of the challenges that you've faced and how have you addressed them?
Sure. Before I start, I'd just like to see a show of hands of any entrepreneurs or someone who wants to be an entrepreneur. Oh, there's a few there. So these challenges might resonate with you because as you know, when you're out there in your own community and you're trying to do a business or to be entrepreneurial, there are lots of challenges that young women or even adult women come across. And some of them may be surprising to someone from a developed world because, you know, you have access to funding or even basic assets through which you can get access to the basic finances to start your own business. But in countries like mine, it's very tough to get access to finances or funding if you want to start a business, because if you don't have the rights to have assets or hold assets, then you can't go to a bank and get a loan. So from there on, you even have challenges like patriarchy, where if you're a woman who wants to start your own business, sometimes you need to get the permission of your husband or your significant other. And sometimes you may not get that permission. And that is also hindering to someone who wants to do their own thing. And in addition to that, there's also domestic violence. And you might be wondering, what does environment, climate change, stigma, and young women, what does it all have in common? It's mostly because none of these are silos in reality. It's because all of it is interconnected, and for the longest time, we've been looking at it from the perspective of, oh, sexual harassment, oh, domestic violence. But in reality, if you look at it from the point of view of a fisherman who goes out to fish every day and brings back home a limited amount of money, and his wife wants to send his young daughter to school, but they can't afford to purchase, say, sanitary napkins, then you start seeing the interconnectedness of all these issues. So it's really not a one-off thing. And to empower people, you need to give them the agency to want an education, to want to start their own business, or to want to really go out there and own their own body as well.
Wanik, I remind, yes, give her a hand. Wanik, as I remind you, is an activist for Indigenous women in particular. Indigenous women and girls are among the most vulnerable in the society. Just days ago, the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women found that this group are 12 times more likely to be killed or to go missing than members of any other demographic group in Canada, and 16 times more likely to disappear than white women. Wanik, tell us about the difficulties that Indigenous women face, particularly women athletes in accessing sport.
Well, I want to first say, that inquiry, that report from the inquiry is really, really important. And, as an Indigenous woman, you say I'm an activist, but really, I only speak for myself. And I speak for my children. I fight for my 2 daughters. I fight for my son. And when that National Inquiry report came out, you know, as an Indigenous person, we are clan people, we are community people. It doesn't matter if I'm a Mohawk from Ganawage, someone goes missing in Saskatchewan or the Yukon, or, you know, you hear of murders, we are all affected. It's like a ripple effect, and it's extremely traumatizing over and over and over again in our communities. But not only is it traumatizing that they go missing, but the indifference, the lack of justice, and the fact that that's what we expect as Indigenous women and girls, that really we aren't going to get the justice, that we walk into this world, we're born into this world as babies, hyper-political beings. And I know, speaking from my own experience, getting to the Olympics, overcoming and trying to decolonize my own mind from things like, you know, when you're born, you're automatically born into a legislation called the Indian Act in Canada, that an external body, a legal body, defines who you are, whether you're Native enough or not. And we often joke, Indigenous women often joke, we said, we are the most talented women on earth because we can give birth to a child of another race. Due to the fact that that there's this whole crazy mathematical equation about identity. And identity means belonging. And belonging means where you can live and accessing services. And in a lot of ways, that internalized mentality that has gotten into our communities, that it's taken hold, it's taken root on how we even identify ourselves and who we value more, right? And so, and how those people are treated. And it's, you know, I've said, and I testified as part of the national inquiry, because I talked about that. I said, we have to really look at it in a very psychological way. That is reproductive violence. When you realize when you're about to have a child, who you have to have a child with. And if you're having a child with someone who's not Indigenous enough, am I contributing to the eradication of my people? Which is what the act that is still alive and well, which Canadian tax dollars go to fund, an act that violates our fundamental human rights every single day. And so as an Indigenous athlete, as someone who's striving to go, you know, to the very top of my sport, and I carry all of that, right? I carry all of that pressure and baggage and, you know, identity issues and all kinds of stuff. It's very, very hard. And that doesn't even bring into play things like, you know, location, financial support, access to facilities. You know, Canada is still a place where if you want to do sport, you have to be middle to upper class. And you can tell by just looking at our Olympic teams. And then walk down Vancouver, right, downtown Vancouver. Do our Olympic teams reflect that of Canadian society? They don't. And that's a problem. And so, you know, I really, you know, all these barriers, and especially as an Indigenous woman, getting to the Olympics was such a hard and extraordinarily, almost sometimes painful task.
But you did it. You knocked down that mountain that Natalia was talking about earlier.
But I have to tell you, I did it in spite of the system, and that's what I'm fighting to change.
Musola, another group that is really vulnerable are women with intellectual disabilities. They're also the most frequent victims of sexual violence, according to studies, because often such crimes go unreported simply because they have difficulty speaking out. In some Middle Eastern countries, women and young women with intellectual disabilities are hidden away at home because their parents are ashamed of them. Can we break this stigma, and how?
Wow. Very, very interesting question. And what is very interesting is we're not only talking about women with intellectual disability. I also bring in women with mental health disability, and then women with disability in general. When you talk about disability, women and girls with disability, then you're talking about all these barriers that I was listening to. You know, when I was listening to these barriers being discussed on women in general, I started asking myself, If I close my eyes, if you close your eyes for 2 seconds and put yourself in a woman or girl with a disability situation, imagine you are that person with a disability. You can be deaf, blind, intellectual disability, or any disability, and then look at all these that have been discussed. Usually we say a person or a woman with a disability is double discriminated or has double barriers. I say it's more than double, because one, you're going to talk about this woman as a woman, then you talk about this woman as a woman with a disability, then the third one, you're going to talk about this woman with that particular disability. So now, what barriers are we talking about? How do we break those barriers? First and foremost, these barriers, most of them are associated with stigma and associated with myths and taboos. When you talk about intellectual disability and when you talk about mental health disability, in most developing countries or underdeveloped countries, it's associated with taboos. Why are you having this child? If you're in the village, you are cultivating, your things are getting well, they'll say, because you have made that child, you've put that child into the business, that's why that child is good, intellectual disability. We all know that sometimes mental health disability comes out of depression, especially in women. Yes. But when people look at it, they suspect maybe you did something. You slept with somebody's husband, you stole somebody's husband, it has to do with witchcraft. I'm just giving some examples. So it's quite complicated, and it's all with the mindset. So first and foremost, to me, it's a two-twin approach. Number one is addressing the top issue, the government. How do we address the policy in going to see how can policy in different areas change so that these women with intellectual disability and girls and mental health are really accepted, and this thinking of taboos is broken, these beliefs, these strong barriers. And then we start with up on the top and then on the ground. On the ground, you're talking about sensitization, both on top and on the ground. Sensitization. How do we sensitize these people so that their mindset are changed? You know, the mind is very difficult to touch.
And the media has a very important role to play here.
Yes, I use film as a tool for human rights advocacy. Why did I start using film and art? Because I realized that when you go to discuss these issues, a person with a disability is already associated with a dark life. You don't exist, especially when you're talking about in Africa. You are dead. One time when I was called, I used to refuse. I said, there's no way you can call a person dead. Until one time a kid called me that, oh, wakufa wapita, the dead is passing. I was so broken. Then I realized these are issues that are not discussed, especially in the African setting. So I started using film because when you use film and art, at least the issue is a little bit lightened and you provoke debate. Where people don't want to discuss and talk about it, they start discussing, because once they watch this documentary or short film or somebody's telling from their heart what they've experienced, now they start discussing. When you talk about taboos and traditional communities, you can't talk same different ages about certain issues. You can't talk about sex, you can't talk about disability, because you're dead. But when you put it on video, you go in the community, in the village, on TV, when you're running a workshop, ministers, governments are listening to that, then you provoke debate. So that's one strong approach in breaking these barriers. There are so many barriers that if I go into details, we'll spend the whole day. But if we are going to break the barriers, we have to look at how do we change the mindset? And not only in people without disabilities, also in people with disabilities. Because from their background, the way they have been treated, they don't exist, especially girls and young women. They don't exist. They are not included in the government plans and also in the traditional setting plans because they are not there. So how do we ensure that they also have the power to talk about their experiences so that they break the barriers themselves, and then we educate the other people to break the barriers on behalf of these people? So we have to take those two approaches. One time I was given an opportunity to train young women with intellectual disability on using film as a tool for voice. I was a little bit scared. I am a woman with a disability, but I don't know much about this disability. So just think about it. I am a woman with a disability, but I'm not a specialist in this specific disability. So I was very scared. But when I sat in this workshop with these kids and they did their own stories, I realized they're very, very intelligent. They would even speak out and say, no, what happens when visitors come, our parents will tell you, can you move? Go out because you are mad. Now, they know they are treated like that. How do we break those barriers? Is educating them also to have the power to speak on their behalf and also to have models. Persons with disability, I really recommend her Ability Award, because when you bring these people with disability and you put them in the community or in the platform like this one to speak about what they can do, then they inspire someone and they become mentors of other young women and persons with disabilities who don't have the courage, because from childhood you are told you don't exist, so the courage doesn't exist. It needs to be built. I think that's one way I can say that we can handle this breaking barriers.
So the first part of the panel was about barriers, about stigma, about challenges. I promise you from now on it gets more uplifting, because we'll be talking about the solutions and how we can overcome all of these barriers. Nancy, we want to hear more about what the Center is doing to try and reverse restrictive bans on abortion, like the recent abortion legislation in Alabama, which makes abortion a felony in nearly all cases. What do you do about such bans?
So you've turned us to what you called the macho politics of things going on in the United States, and that's going to be uplifting. So
hearing what you'll do
yes,
about
I know.
it is
and we're going to get to
empower
that.
us.
Yeah. So I mean, just to capsulize what we're up against in the United States, I have a president who ran on the platform of putting justices on the Supreme Court who would reverse Roe versus Wade, which is our constitutional decision protecting the right to abortion, and said women should be punished, I think were President Trump's words when he was running, and we've been fighting restrictions at the state level in the United States and in the Congress for decades, but this has unleashed a whole new Alabama style.
Whole new level.
Whole new level. So we have Alabama, we have 6 weeks bans that have passed in a lot of states that would ban abortion before women would even know that they were pregnant. Now, what's important to remember, and we always are reminding people this in the United States because the clinics are open, is that the constitutional protections are actually quite strong. The U.S. Supreme Court, over 45 years ago, made the decision that the U.S. Constitution protects a woman's decision about whether or not to end a pregnancy. And they have stuck by that. And because, for all the reasons when we're talking about human rights principles of privacy and health and life and future, the court has said for women to be able to participate fully in the social and political and economic life of the nation, they need to be able to have control of their reproductive life. And further, that it's the promise of the Constitution that there's a zone of personal decision-making that the government can't enter. And so the stakes are high, because that's what we're defending. And 3 years ago, the Center for Reproductive Rights won a case against the state of Texas in which we were able to struck down some of their completely medically unjustified laws that were closing clinics throughout the state of Texas. So that is the strong, pushback. And the Center has brought 50 cases against states in the last 7 years, since 2012. We have won, I think the record is about 90% of them. So we continue to be able to use the kind of power of law, those principles. I mean, the beauty about being in the courtroom is that unlike in 60 Seconds on Fox News, where everyone's screaming at each other, facts are developed, they matter, principles matter, applying those principles to the facts matter. So we are going to be, suing in all these states, blocking those laws, but it is rolling up to another showdown in the Supreme Court. But we will be there every step of the way. And even should we lose in the Supreme Court, we're never going to give up. We go back to the state constitutions. We'll go to Congress to pass it. And if we have to, we will fight for a constitutional amendment that protects forever women's reproductive health care.
And Hina, how do we push for policy change in countries where abortion is illegal? Because then women are left at the mercy of back alley abortion providers, and this endangers their lives, the lives of their babies. How do we push?
I think first of all, I want to wish the best of luck to Nancy. I think they have
we need more than luck.
They have a difficult environment in which to work, but I think it's worthwhile to put all their energy in this to save not just the women in the United States, but also to save Roe v. Wade, because that is something that we all look towards in many ways. So best of luck, and we are all with you. The other thing that I want to say in response to your question is, look, the question right now is not just legal reforms, it's not just social reforms, but it's being able to find the right message so that you give women the agency to make the decision about why it is necessary or expedient for them to undergo an abortion. And I think this is not such a challenging thing as we think. I mean, I think it's much easier than we think it is, because women are already making the decisions. Even if they are going to the back alley thing, the basic decision about the abortion is already there. Now we want to open the doors for them to have better choices, better options, to implement the decision that they're already taking.
So you have to use a language they understand. For
Not
instance,
just the language they understand, the language that states understand as well. You know, you can make laws, but if governments and state institutions are not putting the weight of social policy behind these laws will fail. So you can't do things in a weak, lukewarm manner. In my country, for instance, and many other countries, and including yours, Shaira, you will note that they'll bring in the legislation for some reason or the other to placate public opinion outside the country or whatever. But then they will always hesitate to implement it or enforce it. And this is what has happened in case of our family laws. We have a good family law legislation, but the social policy doesn't back it, so women never get the benefit of it. And this is what I think is important for us to understand. It's not just social pressures and community awareness that will help us. We have to make sure that the states are committed to make good social policy to back any legislation that gives women the right over their own body, whether it's reproductive rights, apart from abortion, or abortion itself. I think there are no two opinions in my mind about it. And I think we have the energy and we'll do it. Mostly, I will also stress that it's not just a women's issue.
yes.
It's also a social issue where the society and the community has to be involved. I think there are many women's groups who forget that women's rights are not promoted in isolation, and that you have to get social movements with you to be able to succeed in your messages. So I think it's important for women to understand how to join the legal reformists. It's important for women's rights activists to understand that other social movements for rights on the ground are the ones who will support you in your endeavor. So, I mean, I'm all for men and women and the society and the communities understanding that many of the issues that we relegate to the area of women's rights are really social issues, and that women's rights, women's empowerment in many ways empowers society.
Okay, well, Hina made a very important point here, Alvaro, about, changing the mindset, and that takes decades. How do you convince women that family planning is a right? It's a right taken for granted here in the West, but not in many of our countries in the South. So what do you do to convince them?
I don't actually think you set out to convince them. I think you start from where they are and from understanding their own values and where they're coming from. And I say that not in a naive way. I'm saying, you should invest in making sure that you understand really those values. And we've seen this many times in conservative spaces, understanding what is going to win the referendum in Ireland. You need to look at that. That is a conservative society. You look at that and you build from there. What is going to overturn the abortion law that's been there for 60 years in South Korea? Again, you really research that and you start winning from there. Once you do that, you start supporting local champions, I would say. And by that, I don't mean the heroic, wonderful teenager or older woman who's there. Of course you support that one. But I don't mean just that one. I mean, you try and look at women who are already coming to get services, who are looking after their bodies, their health, maybe who are already have used family planning in the past, contraception in the past. And you start making sure that they understand that maybe we are going to need your voice to also come out, to express itself, to bring other people along. In a way, that's how we approach it at IPPF. You start looking at clients of the health services and providers of the health services to become activists, to understand the rights issue that you're saying.
They need to be trained, the service providers.
They need to be trained, and they need to realize that that is what is expected from them. I don't think it needs special training. You are a woman that has come to get family planning because you want it, or to get other services, and you can start talking about that. You don't need a lot of training. I mean, of course, they can help you in method mix and all sorts of things.
But in many countries, they also have to be female, because the women stay away if they find a male service provider in the family plan.
Absolutely. So you need to make sure that that report is there. So I really believe in the role of both clients and service providers in terms of creating the right environment. But at the same time, I believe we do need a deliberate approach to this that has to do with comprehensive sexuality education, or whatever name we use to call it in different settings, which has to do not just about training about sex, sexuality, and contraception, but around relationships, around all the things that Lena was mentioning before, starting early in an age-appropriate way and building from that. And that's how we get to a situation where people feel comfortable accessing contraception. And I think it's important to understand that we have access issues. And I loved, one of the things I really loved of this conference was we were in a room sort of with a lot of young activists, women warriors were the way they were being referred to and referring to themselves in a room. The First Lady of Namibia was there and gave one of the most moving speeches I've heard in this conference. It was fantastic. She started it and you wanted to close the meeting there because it was so amazing that you thought, God, I've got enough. I can go home now, and it will have been worth the trip. And everybody was feeling super energized. And at the end of it, this young woman living with HIV stood up and said, wow, I've never felt this powerful in a way. And I'm very proud to say this, and I'm very proud to meet here my First Lady, because I'm also from Namibia, but have never met her because I'm from the north of Namibia. It's a fantastic experience. I'm so energized. But let me remind you that there's been no condoms in northern Namibia since October. Right? So when we talk about stigma and discrimination and how hard it is, yes, we need these activists, but we also need to deliver, and I say that with shame. And I hope that if in a month from now we go back home and there still are no condoms in northern Namibia, each one of us that's come to this conference, and particularly the UNFPAs of this world, the UNAIDS, the IPPFs, the Gates, will say shame on us, because it is not difficult to get condoms to northern Namibia.
I'm going to have to ask you for shorter answers now, because we're fast running out of time. But Lena, somebody said, I think it was Wanique, that women essentially have a predetermined status code when they come to this world, determined by culture and religion. How are you fighting that?
Well, the challenge is that women's bodies and lives and every decision that's important to them about marriage, divorce, inheritance, children, whatever, is determined by their religious sect in countries like Lebanon and other countries in the region. So that's not working for women. More often than not, religions have not been friends of women's rights. So what needs to happen is uniform secular law. Yes. It's long overdue, right? It is long overdue. It makes no sense for us to continue like this, where we can't agree on things like the appropriate age for marriage, and too many opinions about marrying a girl at age 11 and whatever else. It is not going to work. We cannot progress. So this is something that's holding us back. Now, how are we addressing it? That's a bigger challenge. It's a fight that was started by our foremothers. I hope that this generation has contributed. I hope we've made some meaningful gains. But it's going to be the younger generation that finishes it. In the Arab region, the population is very young. So what I want is for them to see the injustice and get really, really angry about it and to take it to the finish line. And I keep saying it's a long fight. And someone please dig me from the grave. Let me know when we've won, because I know that we will.
And to yell no, right? Anouk, we want to hear a success story from you. Sustained Solutions has been transforming lives of women. Share with us one quick success story.
Yes, just to add into the whole cultural norms and the whole religious norms shaping how you get married or how you take agency of your decisions. Another factor that we've seen is economic empowerment, because income really challenges and decides who you get married to, whether you do want to get married, all of those things, because sometimes you might even get forced to get married to someone else, just depending on the economic empowerment aspect. And something that we've been able to do in Sri Lanka is that we have trainings, we have workshops, we have skillings, because Sri Lanka is a country that's just which has the 14th largest gender gap in the labor force. And it's terrible, because we have the 14th largest gender pay gap. And what we're trying to do is to ensure that young girls have access to different types of skillings, whether it's the informal sector or the formal sector, to get that skill so that they can make a better living. And something that we've seen is, even through our workshops, you sometimes have men coming up and saying, oh, now I feel like maybe my significant other should actually go and get these skills, go to these workshops, get this type of education, because even she can maybe earn 3 times the amount that she's getting right now if she does go and gets these skills. So that's definitely a success story that we've had.
We have 5 minutes left, so 2.5 for each of you. Wanique, tell us how you've helped Indigenous athletes, women, and has being an Olympic athlete helped amplify your voice?
Well, absolutely. The self-determination and the sovereignty that I gained over myself and my identity and my body through becoming an Olympic athlete is something that has given me so much confidence and courage. You can say what you want, and I know I have lots of detractors and I have a lot of fans, but you can never take away the fact that I fought my way to the Olympics, and I got there after a lot of hardship. But that confidence that I've gained, and also never leaving behind my culture and who I was as an Indigenous woman, but as also an Indigenous warrior, I brought into my sport my Indigenous understandings of justice and equity, and led a movement within my sport to get rid of abusive coaches, and which was 18 years ago, much earlier than what's happening now with the safe space in sport movement in Canada. And I hope that we contributed in a way to that. So bringing my Indigenous understanding of equity and justice was really important to me. And I've used my voice to help amplify other voices. And that's important within our movements and within our Indigenous world is, I have to stand behind my sisters like Jody Wilson-Raybould and Cindy Blackstock, who are fighting for us and fighting to bring our Indigenous women's ways into the mainstream. And it's tough and it's lonely and there's criticism. But you know what? I hope all of them know out there, all those women fighting for justice know that they have a pretty tough Mohawk warrior at their back, and I got them. So that's how I use it. I come from a fearless people. I come from a people who never gave up. I am here today. I had the success I am here today because I come from those fearless people. I have to be fearless, and I have to teach my young kids how to be fearless.
Musola, last words from you. You are the voice for the voiceless. What message will you convey here at Women Deliver to help women with mental and intellectual disabilities?
Wow. What I would encourage people to help women with disability is to encourage them and empower them with strategies that they themselves can speak on their behalf. I have always learned to use my challenges, my disability as my motivation to do what I have to do. Because most of the time it's these obstacles, the barriers, the disability. If you haven't been taught that you use it to break through, then you are left in this world where you don't know what to do. So to me, my word of encouragement is please go and tell that woman, that girl with a disability, empower that woman, that girl with a disability to have the power to speak on their own. Inclusion is very, very important. I always say we have to make the difference between integration and inclusion. Most of the time we talk about integration, not inclusion. So let's promote inclusion, let's promote power within those women and girls with disability, and then we're going to break the barriers because they'll be the voice for themselves, and then let's encourage them to speak to educate others, the information that you teach them so that they teach others, so that we have a channel, a large group of women and girls with disabilities who are empowered with strategies to break those barriers so that they go out and spread the word, and we have a good, inclusive, friendly society that will remember that each and every person is equal in life. Thank you.
This has been truly inspiring, an extraordinary panel. Please give them a big hand. Many thanks to our speakers. And may I remind you, the session isn't over yet. We still have another phenomenal keynote speaker coming up. But thank you for being here. Many thanks to all of you. And please stay in the room because we have more. Thank you.
Welcome to the stage co-founder of Malala Fund, Ziauddin Yousafzai.
Hello, good morning, Assalamu alaikum. It's just an honor to be in this conference and a real pleasure to be speaking after this amazing panel, which I just watched on screen. And for me, it's always a pleasure and a moment of pride to be known as Malala's father. A daughter's father. Once upon, she was my daughter, and now I am her father. And this beautiful reference of introduction stands out as quite an accomplishment when I look back and think of my own childhood. I grew up in the northwest of Pakistan in a small village with 5 sisters and a brother. Mine was a typical patriarchal family. I noticed that I had milk cream in the morning tea while my sisters did not. I could see that the sumptuous parts of the chicken were eaten by men, and the bony one were left for the girls. I had better clothes and more pair of shoes, while my sisters had not. And the worst discrimination that crippled the future of my sisters was deprivation of education. And like society, even the government was kind of patriarchal, because there were many schools for the boys, but hardly any school for the girls. My parents had tall, big dreams for me, but for my 5 sisters, their only dream was to get them married as early as possible. Some of my sisters were much smarter than me. They could have become teachers, nurses, doctors, social entrepreneurs, but their lives were decided at the moment they came into this world. While I was pursuing my dreams in a school, they stayed home. They stayed home and they could not become themselves. They could not dream beyond becoming wives and mothers. And I realized that too many women die as if they had never been born. You might be thinking, what changed me to be a different person? And my one-word answer is education. Education changed me. It made my inner being fair, just, and beautiful. And I became very conscious of inequalities and injustices against women and girls. I was so angry seeing my first cousin bound in a forced marriage, and she could not come out of it because of the social taboos. I was so disturbed seeing young girls at the age of 14 and 15 being married at the age of 14 and 15. And I always get shocked hearing about the horrible stories of honor killing. I dared to challenge the inhuman traditions and discriminatory social taboos and social norms that harmed women and girls. And I started from my own family. The first person I believed in was my wife. Men in patriarchal societies are considered weak and timid if they consult their wives on business and political issues. But for me, my wife was a treasure of wisdom. And whenever I found myself in trouble, the first person I would go to was my brilliant and beautiful wife, Torpeke, and let me acknowledge her presence here. Would you like to stand? Thank you. One thing that really struck me was the absence of women's identity in my culture. I never saw my mother's name on a doctor's prescription. When I took her to doctor, she was mother of Ziauddin. If my father accompanied her, she became wife of Ruhul Amin. I wanted to change this invisibility. And that was the reason that when Malala was born, I named her after the well-known Afghan legendary heroine, Malala of Mewand. And that was the reason that few weeks after, when my cousin brought me our family tree, and it was a long list of men traced back to 400 years. What I did, I looked at the tree and picked up my pen and drew a line from my name and wrote the name of Malala. So I can say that I was a feminist long before I had heard the word of feminism. I and Torpeke, we both grew up in typical patriarchal families, but together we were able to create and build an egalitarian family. We changed the family norms, and we both are so proud of our two sons who strongly believe in gender equality. To see the same change in the community, I started a school and I became a teacher. Because I believed and I believe that quality education, let me stress upon the word quality, that quality education is the most powerful equalizer, a magic wand. I could imagine that my 5 sisters would have entirely a different life if they have had an opportunity to receive education. So I was determined to educate my own daughter and hundreds of girls of my community. It was a joyful journey for many years as a school teacher, to see girls in the classrooms and the computer labs, in the science labs, playing sports and speaking in the debating clubs. But unfortunately, this happiness of peace and education did not last for long. We had hardly completed 12 years of our school when Taliban came and they started Talibanization. They brought death and destruction to the beautiful paradise-like valley of Swat. They destroyed more than 400 schools and imposed a complete ban on girls' education. This was the moment that I had to stand up for girls' right to education. This was the time that Malala had to speak up and to defend her right to education. She wrote a blog for the BBC to tell the story of education in the Swat Valley. She volunteered herself and appeared in New York Times documentaries to tell her story. And she spoke to every platform she could. And this one girl with a voice was more powerful than the guns and bombs of Taliban. And let me tell you one thing, a very important thing, that when your rights are violated, you should be the first person to speak up, because your voice is the most powerful. That's why Taliban thought Malala's voice is a threat to their ideology. They came after her. and wanted to silence her forever. It was a miracle that she survived. And the girl who was speaking for 50,000 girls in the Swat Valley when girls' education was banned, now that girl is speaking for 130 million girls who are not in school. And we have an organization, the Malala Fund, that is working for a world where every girl can learn and lead. It champions every girl's right to education for 12 years, free, safe, and quality education. Because we all know that when girls go to school for 12 years, they get jobs, and they can earn twice as much as those with no education. If we educate all girls for 12 years, we add $30 trillion to the world's economy. Girls' education is the most rewarding phenomena that contributes to peace, health, equality, democracy, and climate change. Hope you all will join Malala's fight for girls' education. But before closing my remarks, let me tell you one thing, that it's not always patriarchy or religious extremism that marginalize women and girls. Women in this room, you know that gender discrimination has many layers. It is structural, institutional, and in some countries, even constitutional. You know how sexism, misogyny, and male chauvinism affect our communities. The big question is for us, the men. The big question is for us, the men. We need to defeat the patriarchal thinking in our mind. We should dare to speak up when women are not given equal opportunities. We should dare to stand up when our female colleagues are not equally paid for doing the same job and the same work we do. We must demand women's representation in conflict resolutions and peace negotiations, like one currently for durable peace in Afghanistan. And lastly, we need to have feminist families, feminist companies, and above all, most importantly, feminist governments to make gender equality a reality. And I can tell you one thing for sure, that this will bring happiness to our lives and prosperity to our communities and our countries. As once Malala has so beautifully said, we cannot succeed when half of us are held back. So let's not clip or weaken the wings of women and girls. Let's flourish and fly together. Thank you so much.
This concludes our morning sessions. We ask all delegates to exit the plenary hall and please bring your belongings with you. Lunch will be served in the fueling station and in lunch sessions.